Alright, so what you're looking at now is my initial thumbnails I did for this scene. I only did three, but I definitely encourage anyone who has the time for it to do more than three. You can really get some good ideas figured out fast that way, and that's what I showed to the client, and they ended up going with number two. And so here's my rough sketch of that, and side by side you can kind of see how I derived it from the initial one. Things changed a bit. I dropped the angle a bit, and then here's a more kind of comprehensive sketch of that. And what I do is just drop the opacity like that, and then just start drawing right above it, working out some of the details. And to get to that stage, I'll show you some of the references I came across during my initial research phase. Oh, I love Google. Look at this. I typed in Chinese fortress, and within seconds, you get literally more reference than you know what to do with. So I sifted through that, and then I also gathered some of my some landscape ones that would be native to the area, mainly studying the mountain styles and whatnot. So here's some of my favorite architectural shots I found in my search. Kind of going to directly use some of these references, and that kind of shows in my scene. I definitely love the gates. I'll put some time and detail into that as I go. So here's what I would do now. Just plan out the lighting for the painting. I'll just drop a gray in, and I do that kind of like right underneath the sketch. I put the sketch on a layer above. I set it to multiply. If you kind of put a light, maybe like a 30% gray, and then like go on this at a second layer at about 50%, you can kind of fill in the form as if it would be an overcast. It's kind of like, it's at 50%, so there's not much going on with it. And then what I like to do is just stroke on the white where I want to plan the lighting. And you can, give or take on this, just try different solutions until something works for you. I like, kind of like my thing is I like to use selective pools of light to lead the viewer's eye around, or to create visual interest. And that's something the Hudson River School painters did too. A lot of famous painters did that. Works really well. If I just had that and kind of like, bright, bright sunny day, which it's gonna be, but just kind of lit everything all evenly and whatnot, it just wouldn't be as interesting. So I'm imagining being here in the scene, and one of these massive floating continents is kind of blocking some of the sun's light, and a lot of the city just kind of rests right in the shadow of it. And I figure if I put that tall mountain in the back, kind of on the left-ish, if I make that all in shadow, because that's also in it, and then I can have some of the light shining through to bring out the buildings, the spires in front of it. And this phase would be, just the equivalent of like a marker sketch. Back in the day, I did a lot of my early work. Just kind of I'd print out the sketch on copy paper, run off three or four of them, and then go through the Prisma markers over just like this as I'm doing in the computer. And I feel that's a great way to practice and start this type of work. Jumping into the computer is not always the best solution. This stage is really all about laying out the space of a scene, and that is easier after, for me doing a lot of the referencing, because I have a better understanding of what the culture is all about and what type of design language they might use, and what type of materials might the architecture be made up of, and that's usually derived from the resources or the climate and whatnot. So throughout the painting, I will constantly refer back to my references that I initially gathered and study them throughout the whole process. And that'll really apply when near the end of the painting, when I'm rendering out the finer details. With my value strategy in place and my sketch ready, I'm actually ready to begin the painting now. And here's kind of the lighting style I'm going to go for, and I just put that aside, but it's going to serve as my reference and the focal point on how I begin to start to lay in washes here with kind of like an airbrush. I think it's also important to note at this stage, if you're not satisfied with your work 100% really at this level, at a sketch, at a value comp, don't take it further. It's probably not going to work out for you. I recommend do thumbnail after thumbnail until you're even remotely satisfied with how you think a finished painting of it may turn out. And so early on when you're doing your thumbnails and your comps, don't always settle for the first draft that you like. You know, I, for instance, with this one, was kind of satisfied with that initial thumb I had, and then when I laid it out a bit bigger up the res, I looked at it and like, how can I really sell the scale and the sense of space, of this city, and I had to, I really just thought about it and kind of took my time and figure out how I can really emphasize, the massive scale of this world that I'm trying to craft here. I mean, had I kept going with that original draft I did, with the layout, I mean, it would have been fine. I would have did it up the same way like this, but when I really try at it, you can sometimes just get better results, and in the end I'll have a better painting, better picture as we're, at the end of it. I think if you have, you set some goals for yourself, before you even begin, your painting, you'll have something to work and to aim for. You always don't hit them, but as long as you have kind of like a mark you're going for, I think you can get some good results with that. Different paintings serve different purposes, and you want yours to work, for you. So I've been blocking in all the local colors, trying to figure out the correct saturation and value. And now once that's kind of done in place, I like to start sprinkling bits of detail on. And as you see, I'm doing that right here with this tree. I have one of my texture brushes with color dynamics. It kind of has like the scattery type of effect on it as well that gives me the illusion of trees. And really all this is just kind of like an illusion of detail thing. And that's where Photoshop excels. Like, you can do anything you want with these brushes. And, used correctly, they can imply lots of detail very quickly. And I say imply because I'm not going in there painting out all these little trees and cliffs, really. I'm just suggesting them. And that's really a great strategy to increase your speed overall. And this strategy of mine just kind of comes from the idea or the notion of try to find the simplest way to show an idea. That's what I've been working towards anyway. And so I set up the initial lighting of it and then try to show as little detail as possible, but we'll get the idea fully across. And here I just made a quick mask of the general shape of the city, and I'm not being that accurate with my brush strokes here. I was like, all right, this is going to be in shadow because I have my reference on the side. I know what's going to be in shadow, what's going to be in light, and I'm quickly throwing in, colors to get the right value that I'm going for here. And that's probably going to be some mixtures of a lot of neutral tones kind of starting out, nothing too saturated. Now it's time to add some water. So I used the selection tool and drew in this selection, and then use that as a mask, and then use the airbrush and kind of glazed in some colors that'll serve as water. And to get those colors, usually in this type of situation, they're usually derived from the sky palette. So I picked some blues and then slightly altered them. And yeah, for now, this water is just going to be placeholder. I'll go back in and kind of tweak it later, but this is just to kind of serve, where it's going to be and the tone of it. And so once that's established, I like to go in and then kind of nestle it into the land. As you can see, I'm kind of working the details on the immediate edges of it so it doesn't have that really sharp and kind of flat look to it. Yeah, I was working on the buildings for a while. I just saw that I just couldn't stand looking at this part of the picture, looking this rough so far. I just had to bring a little bit of it up, and I'll jump around. I'll go back and work on the buildings, and then come back down to the ground level. Later on I'll add some houses and little farms and whatnot. Really make the scene come alive. But I like to do that at the end. So now I'm just kind of working on some details on the buildings, and when you make kind of like these horizontal and vertical lines as I am to establish things, that also helps sell the perspective. And with a picture like this, the perspective absolutely has to be correct. And as you can kind of see, I'm just trying to make it match with the grid I set up early on to begin with. And since this building is entirely going to be in the shadow, the values will not vary as much as some of the other buildings. And so what I do is I like to make a selection based off the perspective for the windows, and then I hide the selection using I think was it Command H, and then you can pick another muted tone for the windows, like with a square chalky brush as I'm doing, and just drag it right through. And as you see, I'm doing this on its own layer too, and it's quickly giving the illusion of windows here. Sometimes it take me a couple tries to get perfectly in line, but I'm not worried about it too much. I'm just trying to sell the detail. I'm not going to go render every little windowsill out and just trying to make it look good. So, standing back and looking at it, and, does it read as windows? Yes. That's all I want to do. And since this is on its own, these are on its own layers, I can click the button on the layers palette to lock the pixels, and then I can go back in and alter things with like an airbrush, which I think I'm going to do now. Yeah, just grabbing the airbrush, setting that to multiply, and hitting the top of the windows, and getting some really deep shadows in those. And see, and it stays into it stays into the blocks I just painted, so it really helps just organize and keep things kind of neat in that sense. And then after I do that, I like to then glaze in some of the highlights. Just kind of slight variations on things. Now I'm really just going to turn the perspective grid on again and correct all my errors in that. And as you can see on the tallest spire there, things are quite off from my actual grid. Mainly just because before I was just blocking things out. And now what I'm going to do is just throw, as you can see, I've got like a square chalk brush, and I'm just throwing in a lot of horizontal and vertical lines to kind of emphasize shadow or different planes. And what this is going to do is reinforce the perspective and kind of guide my designs along the way as well. And yeah, I didn't get it right the first try, and I don't think many people get it right on the first try as well. It's all problem solving, and it's a matter of working through that problem, identifying a solution, and sticking with it until you can get it right. Like the background, the mountain I have back there on the right, the large one, that's not looking right at all to me right now. It's rather flat, and I'm gonna have to go back when I'm satisfied with these buildings and correct it all. And identifying the problems and you know creating a solution will just get easier as you get more experience. So in other words, like you'll develop your artistic sense over time through like lots and lots of painting, and your aptitude for all of it will just it'll grow with you. It's a skill, you can develop it. Um, and mine has increased lots, over the last 3 years. I've seen it. I look back at my old paintings, and at the time I thought they were phenomenal. I was like, wow, I can't believe I did this. This is awesome. Completely satisfied with it. And I'm sure many of you feel the same way about your own work. You look at stuff you did last year, and it's like, oh God, what was I thinking? And I personally think a way to avoid, pitfalls and the feelings of failure is don't set yourself up with it to begin with. Don't set unrealistically high expectations for yourself when on the outset. You're gonna make a lot of bad paintings, and I do too, before they really start getting good and hitting the right numbers. And one thing that used to help me get through some of those rough spots, in your own personal development, especially when I was just starting out, I would, really just as I worked, I visualized myself as the professional I wanted to be. And I studied the hell out of the work I wanted to do and for the companies that, I ideally want to work for. And, it just helps and it puts you in a positive mindset and to give you the drive to keep on going. Yeah, and so now I'm working on, this different cluster of buildings, and intentionally I'm making them a bit different architecturally than the ones on the left, because um, in the client's brief for this one, there was a couple distinct different buildings, palace sets that were made up the whole city. It's seldom all the same architecture regardless, but so that's what I wanted to do with this picture, kind of have different groups of buildings that kind of look similar but then different at the same time than ones a little further apart. Though I do feel that it's an important practice in creating any type of city, because if you look at them, no city was built at the exact same time. Like it's built over a long period, decades. Cities are constructed. Even within the same culture, you'll get a lot of variety in the architecture. Alright, so I just blocked in some basic buildings, and then I did the ships on a different layer. And to kind of show you how I did them, I just, use a chisel tool on one value and kind of shape them out and keep them on their separate layer to refer back to later. At this point, I really want to start adding in some of the atmosphere and the clouds, is it will kind of dictate how much detail it's gonna hide in the scene, and so I don't want to over render anything that a cloud's is gonna cover because that'll be a waste of time. But seeing this big and massive, it's really important to kind of choose what to detail and what not to detail, and that's something I struggle with all the time, and I don't want to overdo any part of it. It's a waste of time, money, resources. Just the best pictures are the ones that only show you what they need to, I feel. And you can go about making clouds several different ways. I mean, there's a million different cloud brushes, customized for Photoshop you can use, and I'm using those to block them in. But if you just use them straight, it kind of it doesn't look quite right usually. So they take a lot of tweaking and actual rendering, and I do that over a few layers. I'll just build up the lights and stuff, and then kind of use the smudge tool and blend things in a bit. The other option is just to drop in a photo plate, and I forgot to record that, but I dropped some clouds in the background. That's kind of how that jumped up in detail in one shot, and you just can't do that aimlessly. You got to blend it right into your scene and make sure the values and the perspective and everything work for it. So now that I have the base of the architecture kind of figured out and in place, I start adding some more of the industrial elements on top of that, because it kind of will give it a steampunkish type of vibe, and that's what I'm going for on this. So I'll also use some more photo textures that I overlay into my scene at this point to help push the detail without me having to waste a ton of hours doing it manually. And so that's kind of what I'm doing here. I just drop it right in like that. It's already in perspective because I was really selective on what photo I used. And I used the layer with the mountains I had as a mask, so that's how that fit right in there. And then I go through all the adjustments, the brightness, the contrast, the color, all in the edit option up top, and then then I'll use an airbrush to kind of eraser to blend it out, because I don't want it sticking too far out of this. I mean, this isn't a matte painting. This is just some detailed concept art, I'd say. So just want it to be subtle. Type of city has been my first real attempt at this style of architecture, and I hope through all the studying and the referencing I did, I in the end will have increased my visual language, and if I needed to do something like this from my head, I'd have a lot easier time doing it now. And reflecting back at this piece, it's kind of funny now that I'm looking at it. It's one of the few pieces, I'd say, of mine that changed very little over the course of it, and I feel before I even began, just from the initial drawing that I started at the beginning of the video, I really had a clear sense of where this one was going and how it would look when I was finished. That's just not the case for a lot of my paintings. And I guess that is derived from how much time I really have to devote to a piece. If I had a really tight deadline and something, I'm gonna fiddle with it less and just kind of, straight shoot for the initial plan without deviating from it and experimenting with other styles. And yeah, this kind of marks about a year and 1 month that I've been surviving solely off of freelance work. I had a lot of part-time jobs, up till then, and I kind of just slowly weaned myself off them as more work was coming in. And that's probably, I'd guess, a natural progression. Anyone just freelancing and not really working full-time for a studio. It was just in 2009 I was working, full-time in a warehouse, just moving shit, and then I was driving a bus. I was a school bus driver and stuff, and I'd come home and then I'd paint and do my work and stuff. But it's been really nice, I have to say, to kind of get away from that and focus just on my art. It surely has been improving over the last 2 to 3 years, and I can't wait to see where it goes next. I always just look at my work, what I did with it, and see where I can take it that I haven't gone before. Trying, subtle different things just to push it. I encourage everyone to do the same. So really, the secret to overcoming a complex image such as this is to, in fact, break it down into smaller tasks and take it, one step at a time. Gather your reference, plan out the colors, what, for the big shapes, then the smaller shapes, and then, really just plan how it will be lit. What's going to be in shadow, what's going to be in light, and only from there, you can, all what I'm doing now, just adding detail on detail, matters. It's really the least important part of a scene like this. So, try not to get overwhelmed with a picture like this. I know I definitely have at times, but you can't let it get the best of you. You really just got to keep on trying and making images, one after the other. You get better. You learn something new every one of them. I'm still constantly looking for new ways to render work and find a better workflow that simplifies things. Um, I try to show more with less. I think that's definitely my goal and something I work towards every picture. I mean, the whole time when I was making this, I'm thinking in my head, how can I get away with masking the detail that wouldn't be normally in this thing? Can I hide it behind some some fog, some atmosphere? Put it in a shadow. Um, because you can't go and detail every little thing out in a picture like this. It's not going to be good for anybody. And with that said, I want to thank everybody for watching, and I hope you could at least take something away from viewing. And be sure to check out my online shop. I've got great things, all kinds of prices. So enjoy and keep on practicing.